Greetings, everyone! Normally, I am not one for book reviews, guys. I really don't. I feel that I leave that to other people to review books, but I feel very compelled to talk about this specific trade, if you will. I consider it more of a compilation book, but it's called The World's Greatest Superheroes, and this was done by Paul Dini and Alex Ross. Now, a little bit of backstory on this series. This is actually 6 stories, all of them illustrated by Alex Ross and all of them written by Paul Dini, and these were done from 1998 to 2003, one book for each year. And these are also pre-9/11 books, which makes them even more significant, but these are basically 6 stories taking not only the Justice League, but 4 individual superheroes in the DCU and crafting, probably in my personal opinion, some of the most emotionally engaging and probably the most human aspects to ever be implemented to some of these characters. And the very first one that I'm going to talk about from this line of books is actually the first 2 stories I'm actually going to talk about here are from The World's Finest. Yes, wait for the image to come up here. The first one that they did was Superman Peace on Earth. And this to me was a beautiful Superman story. Anybody that hates on Superman and says that he's unrelatable needs to read this story. Because in this story, it's Christmas Eve in Metropolis. And on his way to doing the annual, lighting of the Christmas tree type ceremony, Superman hears a cry for help and finds out that this young girl is being trampled on by the crowd. And he rescues her, and when he checks her vitals, he realizes that she's malnourished and that she's basically starving. And so he takes her to a soup kitchen and comes to find out that she was a runaway who was very poverty-stricken. She couldn't find a job, and she was basically starving on the streets. And Clark is so bothered by this that he actually decides to do something about it. He decides to check all articles relating to world hunger. And so he decides that he's going to try to tackle the issue of world hunger. So he goes to Congress and basically throws out a suggestion that for a whole entire day, the whole entire day leading up to Christmas Day and what have you, that he's going to go around the world, take all the excess grain supplies that the U.S. has, and he's going to donate them to as many villages as he can all around the world. All these poverty-stricken countries, these third world countries. And it's very great because along the way he faces, mad dictators, people that are absolutely living in fear of him, and people that are so malnourished and so starved in some countries that they will literally fight each other tooth and nail and even cannibalize each other, dare I say it, to get any scraps of food. And when Clark sees this, he truly starts to understand that even he himself can't really tackle this issue all by himself, and the book ends with a very, very tragic, note. Because the tugboat, the supply boat, the tanker that he was using to carry all the food, when he's going to one country, I can't remember which it was specifically, they shoot a missile that blows up the tanker and contaminates/destroys all of the food. And so pretty much Clark fails. All the other villages go starving, but the book ends with him as Clark Kent taking a whole bunch of urban children from orphanages, etc., to the Kent farm, and he teaches them how to properly, plant grains and corn and all that stuff. And he talks about how one day, maybe he can lead by example. But what's great about the book is that they literally show that. They show the positive effect of what Clark tried to do. It did, however, ripple effect as people, including the girl that he said at the beginning, do praise him. So he doesn't completely fail, but he fails enough that he realizes that not even he can stop world hunger. But moving on to the next story, which is Batman War on Crime. And this is great because we see Bruce Wayne he basically tactically assesses for you not only, his life as putting on the facade of being the billionaire Bruce Wayne, but as Batman, the beautiful arc of this story is that it shows a young boy whose parents are murdered almost in the same way as Batman himself. And the story is basically Bruce trying to not only take out crime, but also this boy is in the back of his mind and he sees echo reflections of his own past. And there's a great part at the end of the book where, aside from trying to save, this Bay Area that everybody keeps trying to tear down for resorts and stuff, what Bruce does is that he basically reopens the factories and he tries to give people jobs and homes, in this Bay Area, trying to give a sliver of hope to the people in this community. But the boy, whose parents are murdered, there's a beautiful moment where the kid is holding a gun at Bruce, and he's got tears in his eyes, and he's about ready to shoot him, and it's such a beautiful moment in Paul Dini's writing, because he starts talking to the kid, and he tells him, you don't have to be like this. You don't have to go down this path. I know what it feels like to lose your loved ones, to lose both your parents. And Alex Ross beautifully illustrates this because we see Bruce with this twinkle in his eye like he's going to cry under the cowl, and I love the line that Paul Dini wrote there. Don't become the thing that killed our families. And the kid, hugs onto him tightly, takes the gun, he comforts the kid, gives him a semi-hug. And there's a great scene in the epilogue where, the sun is shining on Gotham, and, Bruce starts talking about how maybe he can't take on all of crime, but small victories will eventually lead to big victories. He saved a kid from having a life of crime, and that maybe it'll turn a neighborhood, straight. Then a community, and then maybe Gotham itself. And as the sun's shining on Batman, he goes, and maybe even along the way I'll find some redemption, but until then, I'll wait. Very beautiful scene, but we move on to the next story, which is Captain Marvel. No, I am not saying Shazam, because that's the word he says to become Captain Marvel, but we're not going to get into that. Anyway, this book was called Power of Hope, and this is probably, arguably, out of all the single stories, this is probably my favorite aside from Peace on Earth. And, Spirit of Truth. This is probably my number one of all the singular stories, simply because in this story, Billy Batson gets a letter, for Captain Marvel, talking about how this doctor at this medical ward or this hospital for terminally ill children want Captain Marvel, to make an appearance. And Billy Batson can't refuse this. I mean, there's no harm in it. Brings some joy to the kids. But what makes this story great is that almost in again tongue-tied, in a Make-A-Wish Foundation type way, the captain has to grant all these kids, wishes and hopes. He takes them into outer space, underwater, trips to the zoo. Some kids, just want to, fly around with them to see what it's like, etc. and so forth. It's a very heartwarming experience, but one of the better parts, one of the subplots in this story is that there's this kid, I forget his name, the kid's name, but he's all battered and bruised, and we come to find out that he was physically abused by his father, who was a drunkard. And there's a very great and powerful scene where Billy shows up, and then right when the guy goes to beat Billy with a bat, he turns into Captain Marvel and basically issues the guy an ultimatum. And the guy quickly sobers up. He stops drinking and, he starts being nicer to his son and so on and so forth. And there's a nice little sentimental scene where at the end, they're actually playing catch. But arguably one of the most powerful scenes of this book, one of the most powerful scenes in this whole entire, trilogy, series, is when he visits the really, really, terminal ward, the kids that have, terminal cancer, they're about ready to die in a week or two. And there's this girl hooked up to a respirator. You know, she's about ready to go at any moment, and it's so touching because we see Captain Marvel kneel down right next to her. He holds her hand, says a few words of comfort. You know, he genuinely smiles at her. And I love the power of Paul Dini's writing because he actually says in this scene, "For all the powers that I have as the captain, I can't always save everyone." And the girl passes away painlessly with a smile on her face. And it shows Billy cup her hand in both of his, and he holds his head down like he's about ready to cry or is in agony. And then a doctor puts a hand on his shoulder very comfortingly, and he just walks out of the room just with a very painful and sad expression. And it's probably arguably one of my favorite panels out of all these stories, simply because it shows that even a superpowered being like Superman or Captain Marvel even, or even Batman, can truly show a great depth of emotion. That at their core they may be superpowered beings, but there is a human side to them as characters. And I very much liked that. Very much so. And the book ends with the wizard, Shazam, and the wizard basically tells Billy, you know, this is why I gave you the power of Captain Marvel. You've instilled hope in these children. He goes, but there was one other person who I wanted to instill hope in. And at first Billy doesn't get it, but then he's like, wow, the whole point of him spending the weekend with those children wasn't just to instill hope in them, but to instill hope in Billy himself as to why he fights as Captain Marvel. And I thought that was a very beautiful, like, moral lesson that Paul Dini kind of, arced in there, and also Alex Ross, the way that he illustrates it. Very, very beautiful story. But we move on to the next one, which is Wonder Woman, Spirit of Truth. Wonder Woman, Spirit of Truth. As I've praised Paul Dini all throughout this video, I'm going to praise him some more because he took Wonder Woman back to basics. This is the Wonder Woman that myself, F.W. Waller, Rapperfest, and many others keep talking about. The kind, genteel, intelligent Wonder Woman who doesn't want to be Red Sonja, where she's hacking people off and saying men are bad, their wangs should be chopped off. No, this is the proper Wonder Woman. And I love this story because Wonder Woman is trying to still spread her word of, peace, diplomacy, and love and whatnot. But the great part of this story is that Diana starts to realize that people don't take her seriously. Not just because of the way that she's dressed, but her condescending attitude, at least according to them, that she sticks her nose in way too many people's businesses and way too many countries' affairs. And they pretty much always constantly kick her out and tell her, we don't need you here. We respect your mission, we respect what you want to do, but don't come into our country and basically tell us what we can and can't do. And there's a great moment where this one Japanese girl basically tells her, what are you? And she goes, I'm no different from you. I'm a woman. She goes, no, you're not. You're a monster. And this, hurts Diana to her core. But what's even more hurtful is that in the Middle East, apparently there's more women being beaten because of her overall presence. And there's a part where all these women basically not only blame her for all of them basically being, increasingly beaten by their husbands, but they also throw rocks at her. And it's such a great, powerful moment to where, all the stuff that Diana thinks that she's doing is actually quite the opposite. All the good that she thinks she's doing is basically causing more harm, not just for women, but for other people that believe in peace and diplomacy. That's a very powerful moment indeed. Because it shakes Diana up to her core. And she goes to her mother. She goes to Queen Hippolyta. And she says, well, Some people just aren't ready to accept our ways. And Diana, while she respects her mother, she wants a different opinion. So she goes to the one person that she knows she can trust. And the next panels is her going to Metropolis, relaying all of this to Clark. And the most powerful, and not I wouldn't say the most powerful, but probably the most genuine scene of the book, I should say, is when her and Clark are sitting down and having coffee together like two friends would. And Diana goes, you know, Clark, you could accomplish so much more as Superman if you weren't, you know, always being Clark Kent. And I love this because this is not only a great Wonder Woman-esque moment, but it's also a great Superman moment, because Clark basically tells her, you know, whether you choose to believe it or not, Diana, I do a lot more good as Clark Kent than I do as Superman. And the one thing that you gotta understand is that I was raised that my powers, my abilities are no different from any other person. I was raised that all the abilities that I have under Earth's yellow sun aren't for my own sole purpose, but they are for the people of this planet. And I use those abilities sparingly. I don't show them off. Now, I do respect the fact, Diana, of what you're doing. I will always respect you for what you're trying to do. But at the same time, a lot of countries don't want to hear your message. They believe you to be a nuisance. And also, some people don't want to relate to you, Diana, because you don't really humble yourself. And this kind of intrigues Diana, you know, the fact that Clark's saying this to her. And Clark elaborates to her that, you know, you gotta look at it this way, Diana. You and I, we're superpowered beings. We can shrug off a grenade. We can basically take a missile blast. We can take as good as we give. These people are flesh and blood. They break, you know, when their bones break, they break. They don't heal like Bruce does. They don't take the beating that he does and keep going. They're not like Ollie. They can't just, shoot something with a thread of the needle shot. These people, when at the first sight of danger, they run. So, if you really want to understand and grasp the people of Earth and the people of man's world, as all your fellow Amazons say, then go amongst humanity. Don't go as Wonder Woman, go as Diana. And so, Diana takes this advice. She takes it very seriously. And they have a beautiful set of panels where she's working as part of a bomb disposal unit. She's working as a nurse in a hospital, as an Army recon officer, an intelligence officer, manning drones and stuff. And it's a great montage because along the way, Diana starts to really understand humanity a little bit more, and she starts to find her own, shall we say, civilian identity, which is, the Diana Prince identity. And I find it kind of interesting that Paul Dini and Alex Ross kind of add that Silver Age twist to where she starts to eventually form her Diana Prince alter ego of sorts. Or at the very least, rediscovers her humanity, if you want to put it that way. I couldn't really tell you. I kind of got a little bit of mixed messages in that story about that. But overall, guys, it was a pretty decent, subplot there. And pretty much the book ends with her freeing a whole bunch of Middle Eastern women, who are being held hostage, and it ends with basically her on Themyscira, in this very peaceful, meditational type moment where she really starts to grasp and understand the meaning of the word humanity and how she doesn't always need to, hippie preach, love, peace, and all that stuff. That rather humanity can work that out herself. Rather, she should just opt to play the role of peacemaker if a major conflict pretty much, arises. But I think what I love the most is that at the end, the last few words, she goes, "I've learned what it means to truly be human, and I have a much greater respect for the people of Mans." And then she stops, and there's like a couple of dots that Paul Dini adds to extenuate, and then she pauses. And when she pauses, she corrects herself and she goes, "I've learned a lot more about the human world." And I liked that very, very much. I thought that was a great personal touch. And now I'm going to briefly mention, I'm not going to talk about it because there's really not much to talk about, but I'll briefly here kind of mention a couple of things about this book right here. Now, Secret Origins. There's not really much to say, and sadly I do gotta skip over this. All this basically is that they give an individual backstory for each of the characters, like a summarized backstory, just telling you who the Atom is, and they mention Elongated Man and Plastic Man and all that. And even the Phantom Stranger, which was kind of surprising in here. But this wasn't too bad. It's just more like a basic overview for people that don't read comics as to who the Justice League are, each individual member, and even the lesser known members of the team, etc., etc. This is very much like the origin of the Silver to Bronze Age, JLA. And I didn't mind that, but this, however, was the second and final story that they did in this series, but also the second JLA story. I should elaborate. And it's called Liberty and Justice, and I'm not gonna lie, this is definitely one of my favorite Justice League stories after reading this. Basically, an alien virus comes on Earth, a parasitic virus, but they don't know this yet. It's like, it opens with J'onn J'onzz, the Martian Manhunter, saving a plane that had lost one of its engines. And Wonder Woman basically tells him, being the liaison for the Pentagon, they got something going on. So, of course, Flash, Green Lantern, and even Batman, who somehow secretly sneaks in, because it's Batman. And they all find out that apparently there's something the government's not telling them. Well, they rush over there, come to find out that this little meteorite rock has basically contaminated the air in this one area of northern or southern Africa. And pretty much Green Lantern puts a dome around the contaminated area. Flash tries to run it over to the Bat Cave. Along the way, he's rescued by Aquaman, who's also affected by the virus. And once they get to the Bat Cave, they're put in the Bat Cave infirmary, where eventually Batman summons the Atom, who goes inside Flash's bloodstream, and that's when we find out that it's an alien parasitic virus. But that apparently the whole entire deal that this virus works is that apparently it attacks the human central nervous system, especially in the brain, to basically cause full body paralysis, but the people are still alive, and so basically they either starve to death, suffocate, etc., because it attacks the most vital parts of the human nervous system. However, luckily Batman and the Atom find a way to actually neutralize the virus and cause it to quote-unquote starve itself. And the first person that they tested on is the Flash, and so he goes back to normal, then Aquaman, and then they start distributing it to all the people in the quarantine zone. However, because of these actions, the media start portraying the JLA in a negative light, saying, oh yeah, they brought this disease just to try to conquer us all and declare martial law, and along the way, riots start breaking out, terrorist acts, people basically have lost faith in the JLA because they feel like they're trying to rule the world. And so all the reserve members like Metamorpho, Elongated Man, Plastic Man, Green Arrow, Black Canary, Captain Marvel, Red Tornado, they all start getting summoned in to try to quell this threat. And each one is successful. And eventually they cure all the people, and Flash and Green Lantern basically dissipate the contaminated oxygen that was around the area. And it's very, greatly done. Everybody does their part, and then and then one beautiful scene that I love in this book is that there's this girl who basically is crying because she has nothing to live for. And right as she goes to commit suicide and jump off the bridge, they have this beautiful scene where Superman actually hovers up, from where she jumped off it, and he's holding her in his arms. And he has this very, very sympathetic and warm, genuine look on his face. And after everything is all done, the cleanup begins. You see Captain Marvel helping move damaged vehicles. Hawkman and Hawkgirl help a construction crew, from the air with, making sure that, the buildings that were knocked down or destroyed, that, from all the looting and rioting, that there's no faulty frames and that they're nearby in case somebody accidentally falls, and so on and so forth. And of course, the Flash runs and helps, the people that were still affected by, the virus. He helps, cure them, as well as Green Arrow being able, not Green Arrow, but Green Lantern, being able to dissipate any air molecules and so on and so forth. Basically, they're just cleaning up all the disasters, and it shows the heroes having a warm, intimate moment. Barry Allen, the Flash, goes home and finds Iris asleep on the couch. They share a warm kiss. It shows Aquaman, kissing Mira, but also holding, his child, his newborn, cradling it in his arms. It actually shows, it shows Batman on the Bat computer seeing all the news reports and seeing each of the League's progress. Wonder Woman is, helping, with, distributing food supplies to the injured and so forth. It's a very positive moment, and then pretty much they cut to a scene in front of the UN where Superman is supposedly giving a speech, but then he's like, I can't keep this deception up anymore, and it's revealed that Superman is elsewhere, so Martian Manhunter was going to speak in his stead. And Martian Manhunter gives, in my personal opinion, one of the most heartfelt, genuine, and probably the most epic monologue / speeches in the history of comic books, in my own personal opinion. And the book pretty much ends with, Martian Manhunter throwing the infected space rock into space. Superman blasts it with his heat vision, and it ends with both Clark and Jean in space looking down at Earth in all its majestic glory. And that's kind of how the book ends. At least I believe that's how it ends. But even if it isn't, that's the way I'm going to leave it off as. Now, do I recommend this book? Well, I'll leave that for you guys to decide. See you later.